everyone, and welcome to the BI Livecast series. My name is Selvi Sekar, and I'm a content and community lead here at Brand Innovators. Today is really special, and I'm thrilled to kick off this Women in Finance Livecast. We've got a phenomenal event in store with a great lineup of marketers. Before we get started, we'd like to thank all of the marketers, sponsors, and even you, the audience, for helping make this event possible. Throughout the event, you will be able to use the Q&A widget and the chat widget at the bottom of your screen. We encourage you to engage with our speakers and other attendees using these tools throughout the program. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming Cynthia Kleinbaum, Chief Customer Officer at MoneyLion, and her moderator, Erica McCoy, Chief Marketing Officer at Resonate.
Hi, Erica. You're muted.
Hi, everybody. Welcome. Took a little minute, a little magic to appear here. I am so excited to be sharing the stage with such a great group of people. But first of all, let me introduce myself. My name is Erica McCoy. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer here at Resonate. Our Resonate Ignite platform is the leading AI-powered consumer intelligence platform that helps brands like the ladies you're going to hear from today drive growth and customer lifetime value. I am thrilled to be here and share the stage with all these great fintech leaders, but first and foremost, Cynthia Kleinbaum, who's the CMO at MoneyLion. We're going to have a great discussion, a lot to talk about. But first, Cynthia, do you mind introducing yourself? You're relatively new to MoneyLion, and your background is really impressive.
I feel like I don't know that you can say I'm a fintech marketer yet, but I'm in the process of becoming one. I joined MoneyLion 2 months ago. I came from many years. I'm not gonna say how many to not date myself, but many years of CPG and retail marketing experience. And I joined MoneyLion 2 months ago to really bring the vision of the company to life, which is really cool and very inspiring. So I'll talk a little bit about that later.
Awesome. I think everyone's going to want to tune in and hear that. There's so much that we can discuss, and we only have a certain amount of time. So when it comes to fintech, there's so many places to dive in. But let's dive into a topic that everybody is near and dear to everyone's hearts, which is lowering acquisition costs by innovating the marketing funnel. What are your thoughts on this? You're getting started. You know that you need to make acquisition more efficient. Where do you begin when it comes to innovation?
Well, look, I'm joining MoneyLion at a time when the size of the business, it's that sweet spot when just spending money lower in the funnel exclusively no longer works, which I think every startup goes through this moment in which you're just spending money in Facebook and Google, and suddenly CAC starts getting higher, and you start wondering, should I start spending more upper funnel? And how do I justify that full funnel approach? And on top of that, I'm joining MoneyLion at a time when privacy is top of mind, when targeting people, it becomes harder and harder, and when really, like, we joke that we should just have our customers pay directly to Google and Facebook, because all of our money starts going to acquiring people, and they start increasing the prices, and competition also increases prices of media. So for us, we had to really think hard about how can we acquire people without having to pay everyone else to be able to acquire people. And the company, not me, this was before me, but I'm here to actually bring this to life, came up with actually a business strategy that is entirely built to acquire customers at an efficient CAC or in an efficient way. The company made 2 acquisitions. So we bought 2 companies that, once fully integrated, are going to allow us to keep the acquisition funnel in-house. The first one is a content company called Malka. It's a content studio. They produce shows for YouTube. They have relationship with influencers, and we're bringing that content in-house. What that does, it's that we are creating a vertically integrated funnel or a vertically integrated company. People will come, our customers will come, and they do now, but it's going to be more and more. They're going to come to consume financial literacy content in our app. So instead of having to put the content in other places. And then when somebody is ready to make a financial decision, let's say that an influencer is telling you, there's this stock or there's this savings account that I have, and then you consume the content and go to a platform, to a fintech to take action, you're going to do that in our app. So that means, that's what I mean when I say financially integrated. The second acquisition that we did is Even Financial. Even Financial is an affiliate network that basically powers thousands of websites to give people loans and give people access to financial products. What that gives us is the ability to offer our customers really countless financial products, not just the ones that we are building ourselves. It's basically a marketplace approach that we see it a lot in retail, and we saw it in Amazon, right? Like Amazon started with books, but now they sell you everything. We're building a marketplace for financial services products. So then that allows us to keep people in our ecosystem and engage with them regardless of which financial product they need at a particular moment. So we don't have to be really at the bottom of the funnel trying to bring people that have intent. We can just keep them in with the content that we're creating, bringing them on a daily basis to consume content to our app. So one of our KPIs, which is very new for a financial services company, it's daily active usage, monthly active usage. We want people to come and engage with our app on a regular basis, which you don't see financial services looking at those KPIs. But if we have a marketplace of products that we can offer, then that allows us to really give them more reasons to engage with us. And that is already lowering our cost of acquisition. We're seeing it very quickly happen.
I mean, I think it's such a fascinating approach and certainly not a traditional approach, but it's really about engendering a relationship with your customers and this relationship is going to span a number of financial products, right? A number of life stages and all the things that are driving their financial life over the course of time. And it's purpose built for that. So it would seem one of the really big opportunities then is that understanding those customers. How have you started that? How have you approached understanding who are the best customers for this type of financial marketplace? How do you in the purpose of acquiring them, right? How do you understand them and what do they look like? How do you segment? Where are you in that part of the process?
Look, I've never worked in a company with smarter data scientists and engineers, so I'm not going to take the credit for the work that they've done, but you have to understand that as a financial institution, we have access to very rich data on our customers because we know what they're spending money on. And not only that, we know how much money they're making, right? Like when I was in retail, it was the data that I had was how much money they're spending in my retailer, in my store, and what type of products they're consuming. Now I can see everything. I can see if they're getting a paycheck, how much they're getting, what they're spending their money on. So I have a lot richer data, and we have artificial intelligence built in the app to take you from one product to the other, to predict what is the next best action that you will take and put that content in front of you. And it's smart enough that depending on what you engage with, how much time you spend consuming content, like if you just skip, then we're not going to show you that right now. We have this, like it's so smart that, for example, we can see if you were hit by a fee. Let's say that you were hit with a late fee because you didn't have enough money in your account. Well, we can put in front of you content to help you budget so you're not hit with that fee. So the transactions that we see in your accounts actually power the content that we put in front of you.
Awesome. And when you think about who those ideal customers are and you think about starting to build that relationship with them, how do you describe them? How do you target them to get more like those customers that you already have?
I mean, we rely right now a lot on lookalikes, and we rely a lot on the platforms that everybody relies on. And we know demographics, we know a lot of the what, but really the question that we're always asking ourselves is the why. And as you probably know from the world that you come from, and I actually would love to ask you that question, like, what can we do to better understand why people are doing what they're doing and not just the what, which is what we see. Because credit score, for example, every bank has your credit score. So if everybody's using credit score to target somebody with a product, there's no competitive advantage. So the old school data points are no longer valid. We have to use other data points. We have our own algorithms, but I know there's companies like yours that give companies data that they don't have access to. So I'm gonna flip the camera and I'm gonna ask that question to you.
Well, I think, it's a great question. And a lot of people coming from fintech, like you said, you have a ton of data. You actually have this blessing of having financial data about people. When does their paycheck come in and how much is it and what are they spending it on? And in CPG and other industries, you lack that data. But I think it's a false sense of security, because just because you know what they're spending it on doesn't mean you know why they're spending it or what else there is out there. And so I think now more than ever, as CMOs, we're looking at consumers who are very empowered buyers, right? They have very high expectations. They expect that you know them, that you're going to deliver a personalized experience for them, that you're going to be able to meet them wherever they are. And especially with your objective of becoming this, financial hub, a partner for their future, you do need to understand them as holistic people. And part of the challenge is for marketers, and I've been around, probably longer than you, and I'm not going to talk about how long that is either, but we've been stuck with data that is either at the household level or is of, unknown origin. And we've been using that because that's what we've had, right? We buy third-party data, or we depend on, social media platform data to create proxies for these segments that we build, and we take the time to try to understand them. I think with the shift in the market, with privacy, the departure of Google third-party cookie, right? Apple privacy, CCPA, GDPR, other laws, all of that is really breaking down all these sort of traditional data sources and the way that people have traditionally been able to get data. And so the people that are leading the effort, and so like you were saying, you guys use AI, which is awesome that you're running your own predictions. We also use the power of AI, and with technology today, if you've got a good, identity graph, if you're able to really harness all the data that's out there to provide these rich profiles about individuals, now marketers have access to a much different robust set that's privacy safe, that is actionable, right? But is also rich and relevant. And I think it has to be up to date, because we're experiencing that as consumers today, all the things that are changing. And I'm sure that, you are seeing these changes and realizing these are opportunities, right, to offer different products and services. But there's not been a traditional data set that would allow you to take advantage of that, right? We can all intuitively say, wow, prices are going up. People are feeling the pinch, right, at the gas pumps. What can we do about it, right? Who are the people that are experiencing that? And then what can we offer them? And that's where data like our data set comes into place. It's very rich and relevant and up to date, and it's actionable for you to be able to take action of it. And it seems like MoneyLion is really in a position to take that action. Yeah. So I think all marketers really, now as a CMO, we really have to get involved and take a look at what sources of data, our insights, our intelligence, our data scientists using, and are they taking advantage of everything that's out there? Of course, we need to know, and we have to have confidence that it's privacy safe, because that's, there's just simply no other way these days. But the potential to capitalize on the challenges that are happening is really, really powerful for me. And that's really what's, I think, been accelerated over the last 2 years. I don't know if that's what you see as well.
Yeah. And I think it's funny, when earlier in my career, I realized that that even though we all thrive for customer loyalty, and we all say like we want our customers to really just interact with us, in this day and age, with these interactions happening digitally, the barrier for somebody to like just go and consume the same thing they're getting from you somewhere else, it's just so low that if you're a commodity, then your competitive advantage should be, if like most products are commodities, right? Like there's small competitive advantages, but it's basically the same. It's how you brand it, is the story that you tell the customers and how you communicate with them. And I think that the more you know, the more you can adapt how you communicate. And what you were talking about regarding knowing more than just the what, but the why, the motivation, that is so powerful, because you can sell the same thing in different ways depending on what's the reason behind a person wanting something. Like a silly example, but let's say that somebody needs, in our case, somebody needs a loan, a quick loan, because they may have had an unexpected expense, or they may really just needed to pay for gas because gas prices are getting so much higher, or they may need it to give a down payment. It depends on their specific situation. And if we just communicate it with a blanket statement for everyone, it's just not going to land. So the more that we know about the person's motivations, the more we can target the marketing, and just not even segmented, like really personalized.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, it's so interesting because I think as marketers, we intuitively go to, segmentation, micro-segmentation. The more that we could describe someone, the better. But I think we've been limited in our ability to take action on that. So we've lived, if you will, with, broad segments, and you kind of look at the more detailed you get, but how am I going to target them? How am I going to find people like this?
Yeah.
Truly, and it's a lot of recreating, right? But I think today, using, and I'm probably better suited to use this information, than ever before. I think it's so interesting to hear you talk about values, because I think one thing that we've been tracking is the consumer activist, and beyond even the consumer activist, which is someone who is going to respond to a brand based on the alignment of those brands' values to their values. There are even different flavors of consumer activists, where some people will just, advocate over social media, or support, or even cancel your brand in social media. And there's other people that will literally shop their values. And so are those consumers are those your customers, right? What's going to keep them loyal to you? And that's really, really important. But where do you can't just do a survey and get that data, right? And people have overlooked, I think, that personal why do I make the decisions that I make? What's most important to me? How do I, and never, I think the last couple of years have really made things like personal value and brand value alignment even more important. It's just something we wouldn't have even talked about like 5 years ago. But that data is available. And I think MoneyLion is in a position to not only use data like that, but use other data about what motivates these decisions, right? To then offer that right product with the right message. And to build the right content.
Totally. We actually have if you invest in MoneyLion, you can have a managed investing portfolio, and you can create your portfolio based on your values, because we understand that more customers are putting their money where their mouth is.
How does that actually work? Then can you tell us a little bit more about that? That's so interesting.
Yeah. I mean, basically, like, download the MoneyLion app, and you can go to the accounts, open an investing account, and as you are selecting, most investing accounts allow you to invest based on risk profile, and you can say if you're comfortable with risk, how comfortable you are with risk. We also allow you to say, I want companies that are really focused on X, Y, and Z from a values perspective. There's different parameters. It's very, very easy to use. Like, when I found out about that, I immediately moved my money to MoneyLion, because it's really easy to use.
And I think it's so important. And that's the type of thing that creates customer lifetime value. That's the type of thing that, to your point, when switching costs are so low, it's a reason for us to stay. And the trick is then being able to identify the people that truly value that. And I think one of the things that's really exciting about our data set is we can identify people who care about certain charities. And there are differences. You can't just make assumptions like we would traditionally do, right? Well, if I have people who are, of a certain age group or a certain, generation, then they're going to want this type of charity. Or if I have people that have a certain ethnic background, they're going to want this.
Can't make those assumptions,
right? It makes no sense, and it's really not, and it's really false to use that as your thesis, right?
And you know what? I think more importantly, at least for the MoneyLion business model, is that we can't assume that people are that we can categorize people by their financial situation, because financial situation changes. And in a span of 12 months, people that may need a loan twice, this is actually data that we have, people that may need a loan a couple of times a year to bridge a gap, a moment in which they couldn't afford their expenses, the other 10 months of the year, they actually have a surplus. And if you are a financial institution that categorizes people by they need a loan or they need investment advice, then you're missing the other times of the year when they actually are in a different situation. So for us to be able to create a platform that helps customers bridge gaps when they need, but also helps them build a foundation to invest, to manage their budget, to actually not need a loan next time. That's what's so powerful about MoneyLion, that we actually, like, I would almost say we want to be out of the loans business. This is like a dating business, right? If we do our job well, you are not going to need a loan all the time. If we help you build your credit score, if we help you invest through either managed investment or even crypto or active investment, if we give you the tools to create the foundation and to create the programs that will get you to have wealth later on, then you're not going to be coming to us for loans, which is fine. We don't need you to always come for us for loans. We need you to trust us. We want you to trust us that we're going to be with you building your future wealth together.
I love that sentiment, and I think it's such a great example for everyone in the audience of how the company is customer obsessed, right? To use kind of a coin phrase, but completely customer centric and data driven. And it's not that you're either customer centric or data driven. It's actually that combination of being super customer centric and harnessing the power of that data and that analysis that you described to recognize that someone who is in need of a loan is not necessarily somebody who fits into a box of this is someone who's going to always be in need of a loan, but rather that loan has a purpose to bridge a gap, which creates opportunities for you to offer them new products. It's so powerful and innovative. I love what you guys are doing. Right. Now, you talked about acquiring a content company, which again, I think for those in the audience must be like, well, geez, I mean, we're Fintech. Why are we acquiring a content company? Well, content plays a really critical role in what you're trying to do. So talk a little bit about how you are using this content and how it connects maybe to the data and how this is going to streamline these buying journeys.
Well, I'm actually going to make a reference to retail, which is the world that I know more. And then I'll bring us back to Fintech. If you think about Facebook, or if you think about Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, every publisher of content is trying to keep you throughout the transaction. So you see an influencer on Instagram and there's always like the shop button so you can buy there. They don't want you to leave, because shortening the content to commerce, the number of steps, making it easier for you is proven to be the recipe to keep people coming back, and also for the transactions to actually happen. Because who knows, right? Like if you see a pair of pants in Instagram and then like you really remember that you're going to buy them, but you may have bought them if you could have bought them right there. It's the same concept in Fintech. But while Instagram and all the social media platforms are trying to get into shopping, all the shopping platforms are trying to get into content. So you see Walmart and Amazon, and this is something that works better, and they're much more advanced in Asia, where they have like live streaming. But it's the same concept of let's shorten the distance from the moment that you discover something to the moment that you act. Now, what is different about MoneyLion, and why would anybody come consume the content in MoneyLion? That is the big question that we're trying to prove to the customers that there's value, right? And the comparison that I would make is like just an analogy is, let's say that you are trying to lose weight and you have the Weight Watchers app. Who are you going to trust that is giving you more accurate advice about what you should be doing? Somebody in the Weight Watchers app that has access to what you're eating and how much weight you're losing and your body weight mass, whatever, like all that information, or a random in a platform that has no idea about you. We want to do that for financial services. Anybody can go and consume financial literacy content in social media platforms. There's nothing unique, right? Like the content may be similar, but we are going to put it in front of you because we know your specific situation. And there is so much content out there that if we don't know your specific situation, I mean, who knows? You may be seeing things that we may be giving you advice for investing when what you need is a loan, or we may be giving you advice for insurance when what you're looking for is a mortgage. So it's really the data and content connection that makes the MoneyLion value proposition for the customer so much more powerful. And on the other hand, there's also a better value proposition for the content creators. We want to bring to our platform the best, what we're calling finfluencers, that will actually create the most engaging content, that will engage with their audience on a personal level, and that will do it in MoneyLion because A, their audience is more engaged, but B, they have more data on their audience and they can create content that is going to be more relevant for them. And C, they trust and they are able to monetize their content better. So it's a recipe of we have to make sure that the audience comes because there's something unique and special, but also that the content creators want to come. We have to do both at the same time.
I mean, it's it's not the conversation I think you would expect to have with the financial services leader. And I think it's so fascinating. And I just want to pull on one little thread that you mentioned, because there is a real gap in financial literacy, and closing that gap is really part of your mission, right?
Absolutely. That's the mission of the company. And it's everybody knows being poor is expensive, right? Like who gets all the information, who gets to know what they're supposed to do with their money? The people that already have money. And that's not fair. And it's not a zero-sum game where we have to make sure that those that don't have money never make money, so the ones that do have money make more money. We can all move up. So our mission as a company, and you hear it in every employee at MoneyLion, when you ask them, why did you join MoneyLion? It is really that passion and that mission of helping level the playing field. And it all starts with education, but it is hard to talk about financial services. It's not a sexy topic. It's not something that people talk to each other about. Maybe crypto, people do talk to each other about crypto. They say, I bought some Bitcoin, but really is anybody saying, I'm in debt, my credit score just went down? These are topics that people are a little bit ashamed of, and they're also not sexy. So we're trying to change the conversation around money. We're trying to make it fun and we're trying to make it engaging, but we're also speaking to our audience in a way that it's empowering, that it's not daunting. We're removing the stigma. We're trying to remove the words that make it so hard, right? Like it's almost like the financial institutions used created this glossary of words to use to make it hard for people to actually engage and manage their money themselves. And we are trying to remove that stigma. We're trying to remove the scary words and make it really engaging in a way that they're used to. Like people, we didn't have to do it. People are consuming financial literacy content in TikTok. So we are basically just riding the wave and bringing the content the way that they're already consuming.
I mean, and people are consuming content, all kinds of content in TikTok. And to your point, when it comes to your finances, is that the best source to trust? Like, are you trusting the best source? And wouldn't you be a better source for that? And it's really about building that trust. I think one of the things that you've talked about is this customer centricity that seems to be woven throughout the whole company. Driving the business decisions, driving acquisition strategy, driving obviously your team and the marketing and the brand. We talked about how consumer expectations are changing, and we talked about your background being in retail. It seems to me like you're perfectly suited to bring that customer centricity to life in the marketing organization. What other observations do you have about what's similar in retail, or maybe what needs to be brought from retail into fintech for the folks here in the audience?
I'm still learning about the differences, but I think the very fact that I made that change and that I went from being a what you would call a retail marketer or a consumer marketer from a CPG background and then retail to fintech tells you how I think about marketing, which is we don't market things that we sell, we market the vision, we market the impact that we make in people's lives. And interestingly enough, Money Lion and Walmart have a very similar customer segment with very similar values, very similar approaches to life and family and how they spend their time, how they spend their money. So I would say there's more similarities than differences in terms of marketing a financial services company versus marketing a retailer, because we're marketing values, we're marketing that vision, not products. But in terms of what's different, I would say financial services is there's more intricacies and more rules about what we cannot do, because we can't really be giving financial advice as like we're not a financial advisor, right? So we can't be giving financial advice, and we have to be very careful on the recommendations that we make and what we suggest that people do. There's another difference is that even though there's thousands of products, it's a limited set, and it doesn't change as much as, let's say, in Walmart or in any retailer. The inventory is much broader. There's thousands, there's millions of SKUs, and it changes all the time, right? Like in a fashion retailer, every season it's a different, completely different portfolio. So being in a company that has a more narrow set of products that doesn't change that much, it actually allows you to, and it's allowing me to experiment a lot more. It's hard to experiment when the inventory is changing all the time. But here we can actually experiment more with the marketing funnel because the product is not changing that much. I find that really like super interesting to be able to play with the marketing funnel without thinking, well, was it the marketing effort or the fact that it was a totally different dress that we were selling? Right, so that's it. And then another similarity, and I would say this is for every industry, and it's a proliferation of subscriptions, and we're seeing it in retailers, and we're seeing it in fintech, and it's no wonder why everybody's creating subscriptions and memberships, right? Because it like locks people in, but also it gives you all the data you need to be able to personalize the experience better. So that's something that I'm seeing as a trend that people are launching. There's too many of them. I think some of them will work, some of them will not work, and it's going to, it's still, the jury is still out on what are people willing to pay for when it comes to a membership fee. Because I mean, I was at Walmart when we launched Walmart Plus, and I'm very passionate about being able to make the experience better by building a relationship through a membership. So we'll see what happens in fintech, but I'm seeing fintech companies creating subscriptions and memberships just like retailers.
Interesting. You know, you talked about experimenting more, and I think as a marketing leader, that's so important. How do you empower your team? Now, I know you've just gotten started, but how do you empower your team to think about that, experimenting more? You know, it's okay, right? We're such a KPI driven, it's a KPI driven world for us as CMOs, right? But how do you inspire them to say, you know what, experimenting is critical, and you build that into the DNA? Talk a little bit about how you've done that.
Well, I think the first thing that you have to create is an environment where people are empowered to take action and where it's okay to fail. Because if people don't feel like it's okay to fail and they're afraid of saying, we ran this experiment and it didn't work, then they're not going to do it, right? So everybody has to feel comfortable saying this is an experiment. Let's not risk everything on this experiment. We have the 70-20-10 rule when it comes to our investment. So 70% of our investment goes to the tried and true things that we know what's going to be the ROI, we know what's going to be the performance. 20% is spent on things that are newer, but we already know they're not going to totally flop. There's no risk, like high risk associated with that. And 10%, we may actually lose that money, right? But that is what then becomes the 20%, and what in the future is going to go to the 70%. So we do it in a systematic way. We do it with data, and we do it empowering people to own their decisions.
So I know we're getting towards the end of our time, so I want to make sure that if there are any questions in the audience, I don't know if I'm going to open the chat and see if there's any questions in the audience. If the audience has any questions, please feel free to type your questions in the chat, and we'll do our best to take your questions. While we're waiting for questions to come in, any advice for those entering the world of fintech marketing? I mean, obviously you did share, you said you're relatively new, but
yes,
as a CMO, what would your advice be to someone who's just getting started?
I mean, the advice is not just for fintech, but it's in general. Which advice would I give anyone entering a new industry? And the first one is be very curious and be willing to put in the time to learn about the product, because it's not trivial to switch careers, to switch industries, and you really have to put in the time. So that's number one. Number two, this is advice that I was given when I started my career in marketing. Understand that you are not the target audience. It doesn't matter if you actually consume the product. Do not assume that because you consume the product, then everybody is like you. This is very difficult to do. And everybody in the company does it, right? Like from a CEO to at every corner of a company, if they are consumers, they think that their experience is what everybody else is experiencing. So don't assume that you know what your customers want, and create the processes and create the tools that will actually give you the customer insights you need to take action. And then from a fintech perspective, I would say this is a very good time to move to fintech if that's a career that you want, because there's a lot of innovation happening. Like there's a lot of new companies doing really cool things in NFTs and crypto, of course, but like in general, there's a lot of innovation happening. And in terms of deciding which company to join, make sure that you believe in the mission, make sure that you understand the financials of the company, because we don't live in the world that we used to live in, which was we'll figure out how we make money later on. Doesn't exist anymore. Now you have to make sure that you know how your company is planning to make money, so you're not out of a job in 6 months. And join a company where you believe in the leadership, where you believe in the how they're making decisions, and in the team, because I think there's a lot of companies that will not survive. So you have to make sure that even if it doesn't survive, you believed in it and you put all you had in it, and you didn't just thought it's cool, I'm going to put that I have crypto or fintech in my resume, but really join a company that you believe in. I think there's a question here. How has your marketing KPIs changed given the macroeconomic climate? Well, because of the climate, our focus is much more on breaking even than on fast growth. So we're being more careful on how we spend our money. That said, it's interesting because a lot of companies have taken money out of the system. So our ability to acquire customers has gotten even easier or better. Our CACs have gotten better because there's less competition. So we have to take the opportunity to spend the money when everybody else kind of left. That said, we are being more careful with it. And then the other KPI that I talked about, we are not just talking about how many accounts do we have, what the revenue per account. We're actually looking at how many people are coming to consume content on a monthly, weekly, daily basis. How much content are they consuming? And the third one is we're paying much more attention to cross-sell, because in this environment, as I said, there's like loyalty is super important. Getting people to engage with you with more than one product is super important, and we have more than one product. So we want our customers to actually be able to benefit from everything that we have to offer, not just one side of the business.
Yeah, I think it's so fascinating, and the ability to actually manifest those journeys, right, to actually identify opportunities and cross-sell and upsell to drive that loyalty it's data that's available to you, and augmenting that with additional data that has describing maybe what in the macro environment is impacting that consumer. Being able to harness that and then act on it is so critical, right? It's really that agile marketing approach. So I think that we're getting to the end of our, I'm going to see if there's one more question. Hold on. I think we're getting to the end of our time. Yes, it looks like, okay, so run it. We may have time for one more question. So
I don't think there's one more question. Is there?
I think we're the next folks are coming up and they're not quite here yet. So we might have time for one more question, or I don't know, Sylvia, are we on time, or have we done a good job of staying on our time here?
Yes, you're on time. Thank you for the session. It was wonderful. Thank you for taking the time to join us.
Thank you.
Have a good one.
Bye-bye, you too.
Bye. All right, help me welcome our next speaker, Katie Berry, Agency Relations Director at USA Bank, moderated by Marina Shapiro, VP Digital at Involved Media.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Katie. So nice to see you again.
Hello, good morning or good afternoon, depending on the time zone.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I'm so excited to be here and to speak with you. I am the VP of Digital here at Involved Media. Just going to do a quick introduction on my end and Katie's. For those of you who are not familiar with Involved Media, we do everything from strategy to execution, optimization, and measurement across various verticals. And I personally oversee the programmatic, search, social, and influencer marketing here at Involve. And Katie, I know many people already know who you are, but please take a moment to introduce yourself and tell us how your career has taken you to your current role at US Bank.
Yeah, hey everybody, thank you so much for having me. My name is Katie Berry. I am the Agency Relations Director at US Bank, so based out of Minneapolis. US Bank is the 5th largest bank in the US. We also have operations in Europe, and I work as our Agency Relations Director. So I manage all of our external partners. There's a whole bunch that goes into that. And previously have managed paid social media for US Bank, have also managed branded content for US Bank. I've been there for 7 years, and before that I was at United Health Group, so did a lot with talent acquisition marketing there. Also a lot with M&A, so have always done marketing. It's definitely kind of my favorite thing to do.
That's awesome. And Katie, I know just looking at your background, your educational background specifically is just so impressive, from marketing, law to master's in public policy. Can you tell us a little bit about how, what inspired you, how you chose to stay in a career in marketing specifically? How did you get through the challenges that we all face within our career, especially being women in marketing?
Yeah, well, I think it is, this might sound kind of a little bit controversial, but I think it's harder to be a woman in finance than a woman in marketing. And I say that because I have backgrounds in both. So I actually studied both finance and marketing communications in school. And I did a marketing internship after my sophomore year of college, and then a finance internship after my junior year. And I just found that I just hated the finance environment. It was just very male dominated. It wasn't welcoming. It was just a lot of spreadsheet crunching. And so what I found is actually, I found that it's ironic that after all this time now, I've ended up working in marketing at a financial institution, so kind of having the best of both worlds. But I agree. I think that one of the things that we've really had to focus on is just making both finance and marketing just more inclusive, right? And making it more welcoming. And so I feel that now I think that we are getting to a place where hopefully teams are just doing a better job of communicating, letting people be their authentic selves at work. And so I'm very happy that I stuck with marketing. I do work in finance a little bit, but I think overall, I just find that it's a great area, and that marketers, I think, can really shape financial organizations as well, just because we lead with empathy, authenticity, sometimes a little bit of a sense of humor. So I think that we really are kind of a linchpin. I think that we bring a lot of light and kind of hopefulness and hopefully some joy to finance as well. That might have sounded a little hokey, but that's sort of how I like to think of us. I like to think of us as kind of forces for good within financial organizations.
No, definitely. I think, you made a really good point with the differentiating finance from marketing and how every industry just has its own niche and nuances that no one else knows until you're actually in the seat and really understand what those are. It's kind of like not knowing what you don't know. So I really appreciate you kind of showing us what that difference is and just speaking to it. And that being said, just curious, did you have any mentors or leaders that you looked up to in your journey through your career?
Yeah. So one of my internship in grad school mentors, she was my boss, and she was just incredibly well liked. She was a journalist, and then had moved to actually state government, which is where I was interning at the time. And I just was like, what is her secret sauce? Why is she so well liked? And not that she wasn't lovely, but what I really think her secret sauce was listening. I think that a lot of people want to jump in and talk or interrupt, right? Or they're multitasking, or you're kind of listening on a call, but you're not really engaged. And so what I found is that when you can really listen to people, make them feel heard, say, especially in challenging situations, hey, I understand the problems. Either here's what I'm going to do to try to troubleshoot and solve them, or here's honestly, just to be really transparent, I don't know that I can solve this problem. And here's kind of the background on why we're in this space to begin with, how we got here, and kind of maybe how we can work through it. But to be really honest, this problem's not going to be solved. But just being really mindful about being a good listener. She really kind of taught me that. I think we're in a world where not everybody does active listening. And even I sometimes feel guilty of, oh, I'm going to multitask on the side, but people can feel that. So I think she kind of took that journalistic background, that listening, pulling out stories, and that contributed to her success. And now I'm super lucky. I have several mentors, but I also have a sponsor within US Bank. And this woman has put me up for jobs that maybe I didn't think I could do. So if you go out and look at my LinkedIn, I actually had never managed agencies before I took on this role. I had worked at an agency, but had not managed them. And so I was like, you know what? I bet that I can do this because she has faith in me. So I think just having somebody have faith in you, having them give you stretch assignments, even stretch potential career roles to sort of set you up for that next step. I'm very, very grateful for that. And I sort of do that as well. Now, when I look to hire people, I think, you know what, I bet this person can do this, or this person has the soft skills, the emotional intelligence. I bet they could learn some of the hard skills that they may be missing. So I'm very, very grateful to have a sponsor. And I always encourage people to have both mentors and sponsors. But I think sponsors, especially in finance, can really be those ones that elevate your career to that next step.
That makes so much sense. I think, having that support is so important. And I love the point that you made of just active listening. That is just so important, especially as people managers and working collaboratively in teams and groups, not only just listening, but hearing what people are saying and kind of reading between the lines. It's not really just answering the question that is being asked, but also understanding why that question is being asked and answering it with all the right information. So, and then of course, I love the point that you made about being stretched and just having the right mentor, the right sponsor to give you the opportunities that allowed you to grow. And that's so important, I think, in every path, every career that we are on, is just having that opportunity to take on projects that we're not exactly comfortable in, but we are able to take on and grow. And as I read a quote somewhere that said, we don't grow without discomfort. So it's in the uncomfortable that we become better and stronger. So I greatly appreciate that and love that. So just talking about your role specifically as a director of agency relations, can you tell us a little bit more about like your day-to-day? What are the nuances that no one else might know who is not in your shoes? Yeah. And what are some of the challenges that you have to deal with on a regular basis?
Absolutely. And I did just want to say one more thing I forgot to say about mentors that I always advise people is getting mentors in your organization, even if you're in like a small nonprofit, which I've worked at, getting mentors that are not in marketing, that are not on your team, that you can just bounce ideas off of, right? Like, hey, does this seem weird to you? Or what do you think about this? Because I've had mentors that don't know any of the players within my organization. And I had one woman and she was like, yeah, you absolutely should be making more. You need to ask for a raise. And she's like, I never start my employees below blah, blah, blah. And so I just find that like you can be really vulnerable and open with somebody who doesn't know anything about your department. So I always say, find a random mentor as well. Somebody that doesn't know the players and sort of your department. But getting back to my day-to-day, my day-to-day is a lot of risk management. We are in finance, so it's a lot of managing they're called TPRs, third-party risk records. So I have to manage all of the ins and outs of that. I also manage all of our finance and budgeting, so it's forecasting all of our agency projects. And then I manage all of the retainers, so all of the scopes of work with all of the different agencies, that falls under me as well. But really a lot of what I do is the interpersonal management. So it's sort of being an interface between our business lines and US Bank, and then the agencies. And so I have regular touch bases with each of our agency partners and just sort of say, hey, here's kind of the good, the bad, the ugly. Hopefully we spend a lot of time on the good and the great. But what I found that I thought was really interesting is actually agencies have said, hey, we don't always work with clients that have someone in your role, and we actually really like having an interface. We like being able to complain to you about US Bank as a client, right? Like they can come to me and be like, US Bank's terrible. They're disorganized or whatever that may be. Or they're not giving us clear feedback. And then I can also go to them and say, hey, you know what? Your creative team just missed the mark here. This just isn't working. And I always say it in a thoughtful way. It's not like I just say the work was terrible. But that's a lot of it. It's just having difficult, courageous conversations. And what I would say is the most difficult part of my job in kind of the last 2 years is, first off, it's a really tight budget environment, right? We know that kind of, I know marketing budgets kind of across the board. We're having to fight for those dollars, and then in turn, our agencies face tight budgets. So that's been difficult. But what I would say is the bigger challenge actually is agency retention and hiring. So you might have a fantastic team, you love them, you love your account lead, you love your strategist or your creative director, and then that person leaves for another opportunity. So agencies have had to sort of plug in the gaps. So sometimes agencies have had capacity issues, and that's been hard because I'm like, we have a retainer, I have all this work, you don't have capacity. That's a difficult thing. And also just when you lose somebody that you love, right? It's sort of, I don't want to call it the great resignation. I just think that people are making a lot of changes. And with those changes come a lot of agency turnover. So not to pick on anyone who's listening, who's at an agency, change is a part of life. US Banks also had a lot of turnover. I think a lot of companies have, even if they're great companies to work for, but that's hard because you have a good relationship, they know your brand, and then they leave, and sort of you have to pick up those pieces.
Got it. And when you're saying when working with different agencies and the turnover that happens, and as you need to vet new agencies, do you have you come up with like an innovative process that you put into place that kind of helps you choose and select who you would be working with and ensure that that's a collaborative process that everyone is kind of bought into?
Yeah, so I work with my procurement partner, Double P's, and what I really like is that we actually do, when we have RFPs, we actually do a blind scoring. So this person gets scorecards from everybody that could be impacted, right? So you might have an EVP or an SVP, obviously, sitting in on the pitch, but then you have people that will be sort of those day-to-day employees working with that agency day in, day out. Everybody gives a score across all of these set criteria. The criteria themselves never change. There's a set spreadsheet scorecard. You will give that your individual scores to my procurement partner, and then he comes up, we meet afterwards, and he does a blind scorecard sharing. So he has sort of each of the categories, who scored the highest and their overall highest score, but we don't have any of the names. And because I don't always talk to everybody after the pitch, I don't know who wrote what. But what I really like about that is that typically the agency that scored the highest is kind of the winner. We don't exactly know who we're picking. That sounds kind of silly. And then he reveals kind of, hey, here's the names. And obviously, once those names are revealed, there is always time to change, right? If it's like somebody's just like, this just doesn't work, we could change. But typically what I find is that highest scored agency wins. And what I like is that that's very equitable. You don't have sort of like one EVP that has one horse in the race, right? Maybe there's an EVP and they happen to have a friend or a neighbor that owns an agency, right? And so it sort of tips the scales. That doesn't happen because it's a blind scorecard. And I don't know who said what because we only see those overall total scores. The other thing that I really like is looking at any new business or any new need now, we must have a diverse vendor in the consideration set. So we cannot proceed with an RFP unless we have a diverse vendor included, which I think is very important. And that can be defined as a woman-owned business owner, a BIPOC, or a veteran-owned business owner. And obviously they'll have that official either federal or state designation. But we worked a lot to increase our supplier diversity. It definitely was a weakness of ours 4 or 5 years ago. So I'm very proud of those efforts and just sort of how we're able to come to consensus building decisions.
That's so amazing to hear. I know inclusivity is so important these days, and just giving everyone a fair voice as well. So it's great to hear that. That's awesome. And then just the way you process everything to ensure that everyone, even at the different levels of the organizational hierarchy, everyone has a say. And that's great. We try to do that internally as well to give everyone a fair voice and ensure that everyone has a say in any decisions that we make as well. So I
Well, a
can
lot of times your specialist is who actually ends up working with them day to day. You know, like an EVP or an SVP is like, I want this agency, which is fine. But then actually that specialist or that manager, they're going to work with them for months, potentially years, you know, and so kind of they reap the benefit of a good partner, but they also reap sort of the punishment if somebody just is like not a good fit, but, you know, the loudest voice in the room or the highest paced voice in the room, you know, sort of made the call. And hopefully that doesn't come across as cynical. But I have also been young in my career and like, how did we get here? How are we working with this partner? But you know, it's just like this person very high up wanted this agency, and here's how we net it out.
That is so true. It's always the specialists who work in a day in and day out and know all the ins and outs of all the nuances and all the particulars and who is working well and who isn't. So they really should have a voice and in a choice of who we're working with. And even throughout the process or throughout our lifetime working with a partner, we usually always have evaluation criteria and timeframes when we do kind of do a scorecard and reassess to ensure that everyone is still happy with the process. So that's so important to do and to ensure that everything is running smoothly.
Yep. And I do those twice a year for our largest partners, once a year for our smaller partners. And I solicit feedback from everybody, right? Because depending on where you are in the company, you have very different perspectives of agencies. So just like you might do a 360-degree peer review, I do those for our agencies as well. And even I learn things where it's like, oh man, I didn't know that the agency felt that way about us, or I didn't know that this person felt that way about the agency. And so it just definitely helps us sort of move forward positively. But I also, if this is okay to be a little bit negative, clear out any bad blood, right? If there was bad blood on the agency side or a specific business line felt like they didn't get the work they wanted, you know, we can sort of clear the air, which I always think is good.
Right. That's awesome. Switching gears a little bit. So talking about passions outside of work. I know we talked before about some other projects that you work on, and you mentioned that you're currently teaching digital strategy as an adjunct professor. Tell us a little more about that and your passions, and how do you balance a full schedule? I know that's a big challenge with a lot of women in business overall, and marketing and finance especially. So I would love to hear your feedback.
Yeah, I have a little secret. I'm here as Agency Relations Director of US Bank, but my real passion is teaching. And it's okay. My boss knows, other people know. And I think one of the things that I've learned is, you know, as the pandemic started, I just sort of said, you know, is the grass always greener elsewhere, or do I just need other things to fill my cup? And so I was very, very lucky. So I applied to the University of Minnesota to teach digital strategy, and I was accepted, hired on as an adjunct. So I teach undergraduate digital strategy at the University of Minnesota. I also teach MBA digital strategy at a smaller university in St. Paul, and I absolutely love it. And I've been very grateful. So I went to my boss at US Bank and just said, hey, you know, I just need more. I need to feel more like I'm giving back to the community. I need to give sort of an outlet where I'm able to just sort of make a bigger difference. But I said, I don't want to leave US Bank. I don't want to just, you know, leave and, you know, odds are, knowing me, I'd probably want to crawl back to US Bank in a year or a year and a half anyways, because it is a really great place to work and I have a lot of friends there. And so what I was able to do is actually flex my schedule. So class times are in the afternoons. They're not after 4 or 5 o'clock. And so what I do is I start early, and then during the semester I teach, and then I finish up my day later. So I'm very, very lucky that I'm able to flex that. And what I would say there is, if you feel like you're just not happy, you're not thriving, you know, maybe you do need to go and look elsewhere. Maybe you need to leave your company. But I think that really knowing sort of turnover and people aren't looking to lose good employees, I also think it's okay to have a courageous conversation and say to your manager or your mentor or your sponsor, hey, I need more. Like, this just isn't working for me. My passions aren't being fulfilled as much as I would like them to be. I found this other opportunity, you know, can we make it work? So I was very grateful that my manager was gracious enough to do that. But what I've actually found is that teaching digital strategies actually made me a better digital strategist and a better marketer, because they keep me on my toes. Brands like Celsius energy drinks or Gymshark, right? Some of the brands that may be in brand innovator conferences and panels. I've learned a lot about different brands. I've learned sort of what is intriguing to Gen Z. And I also bring in trends every week. So I'm actually more on top of my game just as a result of teaching. So being able to pursue that passion has also elevated my own career. And so that's been very gratifying. And then outside of work, I just try to really keep good work-life balance. So I don't have email on my phone. So I work really, really hard when I'm here. I'm fully present, give my best. But then on nights and weekends, because I don't have my laptop up, I have no way of being contacted. Obviously, if something blows up, people can text me. Of course, it's not like this is an iron gate. But I found that really lets me unplug and unwind. And then I come back in the morning refreshed, ready to jump in and give my best. So I know that does not work for a lot of people, but it's just, I found in previous jobs, especially when I worked internationally, it was kind of hard for me to set boundaries. I will admit I was bad at that. So in taking email off my phone, I found that it's easier for me to be more present in that personal side of my life. And that's worked well for me. I know that that's not something that a lot of people would do. It's a little funky when I'm traveling. Like, I'm like, you have to text me. I don't get email unless I have my laptop up, but I don't regret it. I found that it sort of really makes my weekends my own, which I'm very grateful for.
That's so amazing. I think it's just the key is finding what works for each one of us, and really kind of honing in on it. And I just wanted to touch on the passion point that you had made, and how that just following your passion made you a better, kind of more fulfilled worker. And that is so true. I mean, we all are driven by our passions, and if we feel unfulfilled, then our productivity goes down. So it's so important. And I completely agree and align with what you said. So really happy to hear that we have that flexibility, and we're more so opening up to that flexibility, especially after the pandemic, and just seeing that opportunity for so many people being able to kind of have that flexible schedule, and people kind of exploring more than just the day-to-day work and finding their passions. And it's great when we can combine it together, just like how you've done it. And it's like, my passion is managing people. So it's like, as a manager, I love, that's part of my job that gives me passion. So it's so amazing when the two kind of come together and make us want to go to work every morning. So, and then when we have amazing teams to work with, that's just a cherry on top.
Exactly. And I mean, think about how selfish I am. I can promote US Bank to these students, promote them for internships. You know, maybe I'm just also selfishly filling my employee pipeline. And there is, just for the record, there is no preference to any students or anything in internships. Everything goes through campus relations, so I don't have sway there. But, you know, it's just also ability to sort of get people to think about careers. And we actually do, one of the things that students have really responded to is actually, I do a career day, and I talk through, here's what it's like at an agency, here's what it's like at a small company or a nonprofit, or here's what it's like at a large company. And we talk about kind of the pros and cons. And even one of the things that we talk about is student loans. And I say, you know, here are the types of areas where you can make a higher starting salary. Here's where you're going to make a little bit less. What does your personal financial picture look like? So I found the students just really, really respond to that. I have a practicum, so it's not theoretical. And, you know, just having kind of really, here's some things you might want to think about as you start your career. Because I feel like when I was going to school, people didn't say things like, do you have student loan debt? Would that change maybe your first step out of college? That just wasn't really talked about. And so I find that, you know, it's not just what are you passionate about, what do you like, but there's pros and cons and good reasons to pursue any number of career paths, especially when you're just starting out.
Yeah, definitely. Well, speaking of passions, are you passionate about any specific digital channel, or do you find more of a cross-channel strategy as your passion? Because I know for me, I couldn't pick one channel. Everyone has its own pluses and minuses, its own nuances and perks. And I love putting together just a holistic cross-channel, multi-touch approach for our clients. And usually that's what the business needs in order to reach their objectives, just that multi-touch experience through the buyer journey. So I'm curious, like, what are you passionate about? Any one specific or any platform, any tactic? Would love to hear that from you.
Yeah, I'm cross-channel all day long. And I even think that there's some what I consider like sleeper channels. Direct mail still actually works, right? We can track that to see like, oh, actually this direct mail piece, which the stats say that direct mail reaches in the sense of like is viewed by less than 1% of its intended target. But that 1% that engages, I myself get stuff like I got something from Stitch Fix and they're like, hey, we want to see you back. Here's a coupon. And I'm like, you know what? I can use a little wardrobe refresh, right? So I'm not above direct mail. Email marketing, right? I think sometimes we focus so much on flashy channels, and obviously, emerging darlings like TikTok are emerging and doing fantastic for a reason. But really thinking about, what is that total channel philosophy and strategy? Who is that target? And nobody consumes anything in a vacuum anymore. So I think it's very interesting. And one of the things that really interests me now is sort of the separation between people that can opt out of ads across everything, right? Hulu, for example, Peacock, Spotify, and then people that do receive ads, right? I'm also very intrigued by what Netflix is going to do. We saw that Netflix just had a partnership with Microsoft, which just announced. So I'm very intrigued to see kind of what Netflix advertising will look like. But I do think it is very interesting. It feels like audiences are getting more fragmented, just in terms of kind of U.S. bank targeting an emerging affluent or an affluent audience. The channels that they're on and their ability to not have ads, definitely forces you to be a little bit more creative than sort of a general market where, people like myself, for example, I still have ads on certain platforms. I don't really mind. I'll just look at my phone for the next 90 minutes, which I know is terrible to say as an advertiser, but, I'll look at my phone for the next 90 seconds until the show's back on.
Got it. And Katie, going back to fintech specifically, I know we've talked earlier about regulations, and they're always something that's changing that you have to stay on top of. I know for us, for example, a lot of our clients are always concerned with brand safety. So we ensure that we use like best-in-class technology, that we use premium supply inventory and build specific brand-specific lists just to kind of get ahead of that. But what are some of the compliance challenges that you face, and how do you solve for them?
Yeah, I think the biggest compliance challenge we have is just how long it takes us to get through compliance, because there's just so many different steps. So we have our creative is reviewed by risk to make sure that we have all the relevant disclosures, right? That could be equal housing lender, member FDIC. If it's wealth management or US bank investments, we have even more disclosures. So making sure that all of our disclosures are done properly, making sure that things are in large enough font. If it's a video, making sure that the disclosure stays up for enough seconds, right? All of those regulations. But we also have our targeting reviewed by an organization within US Bank called FARB, Fair and Responsible Banking. And so what they're looking at is the targeting equitable? Is the targeting the opposite, meaning predatory targeting? And sometimes where we net out with them is they say, you know what, you need to make your targeting more generic. You need to have more general market targeting. You can't just target the specific segment, right? Or if you target a specific segment and layer on, interest targeting, for example, they're like, no, you can't do that. We don't target by things like specific zip codes, anything like that. Ever since Meta reached that housing employment credit targeting, we take that approach sort of across the board. But getting targeting approved is kind of the second layer once the creative looks good. And then the third layer is if it is not in English, we have an organization called Translation Governance that makes sure that all of our creative is also appropriate, both culturally appropriate, but also from a risk perspective, right? Does the language itself make sense? So there's sort of three pieces of the pie that we have to go through, along with just the general proofreading. But one of US Bank's 5 core values is we do the right thing. And so I think that it is really important. I probably one of my weaknesses as a professional and a person is patience. So sometimes I'm like, can't we just get this through? Can't we just get this live? But at the end of the day, we do the right thing. And being a very ethical company, it is very important that we do a good job with targeting, that we are doing everything the right way. And so really risk, I look at as a partner to really help us make sure that we're doing the right thing. I don't look at them as a barrier or a hindrance. And they certainly keep us out of trouble and help us, honestly, probably get better results because they really look at the whole market.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, audience targeting can be so creative and so sophisticated that there's so many variations and segmentation that we can place. And every brand really has its own kind of nuances and its own restrictions. So I could see that being a challenge for sure, and be happy to hear that there's always solutions. So it's just being creative and really keeping track of everything that needs to be considered.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and as the area of fintech is growing over the last few years, we've touched base on this before. The regulations are changing, customer experiences are changing. What kind of experiences have you noticed consumers are looking for now, and how is US Bank building on these experiences?
Yeah, I think one of the most interesting things to me is just the growth in people talking about personal finance, right? Whether that's talking about it online, whether that's talking about it at dinner with friends, right? So, back in the day when I was growing up, you never talked politics, religion, money. And now I just think that it has become not an open secret, but just an open topic, right? It's just as appropriate to talk about finances as it is to talk about many other topics. And so we see that things like the personal finance section of TikTok is just overwhelmingly successful. US Bank does not do a lot of organic TikTok, but one of the things that financial institutions have there is just to make sure that all the information being put out there is accurate, right? So I'm not here to talk about political misinformation or anything, but some of the content creators, they're not financial experts, or in the case of things like cryptocurrency, they might say, invest here, I made so much money. Well, these people are coming in so much later and they're not going to have the same result, right? I just saw today that Celsius has filed for bankruptcy and that there's over 1 million customers that aren't going to get their money back. So, there's definitely risk there. And I'm not trying to pick on cryptocurrency at all. I just mean it's a topic a lot of people are engaging with. So where US Bank really tries to position themselves there is to just be a really financially accurate, a little bit risk adverse in terms of everything's approved by risk. It's kind of place for people to come and learn. And so one of the areas that we've done really, really well is Pinterest pins. So we've done a lot with sort of how can you better yourself financially on Pinterest, a lot of education. And then we also have a content site called Financial IQ, where we have all sorts of topics, whether that's wealth management, whether that's starting or maintaining a small business, whether that's purchasing a home, whether that's saving up for a wedding, or we have really specific topics such as, saving up for surrogacy or infertility treatment. So we can go very broad or very specific. And we find that actually our secret sauce there is actually SEO. So what I've been surprised to learn is just how often people are just searching for things, like how do I afford surrogacy treatment, for example? And that's a topic then where we maximize all of our articles on Financial IQ. And a lot of people, a big part of our traffic is driven by people just searching and us just being a really reliable, highly ranked authority on these topics. So we've really found that things like email marketing, providing information there, Financial IQ, drawing in people that maybe have never heard of US Bank, maybe they just look at it as, oh, this is just another blog, but it's a blog that I trust, or really, really reliable information on social media. People are just looking to gain financial acumen. They're looking to actively invest. We know that more people than ever are entering the market, and you only need, you could invest with $25. So people are looking to get in and learn. And so really we position ourselves as a place to offer financial education. But I just think as a whole, I just think that personal finance is really an emerging topic. If you look at health and wellness and fitness, personal finance now has a similar interest, a similar sort of engagement, which it certainly, 5 to 10 years ago, it still felt very, very quiet. I would never talk about salary or talk about money, even with my closest friends. And now it feels like I'm like, you should ask for more. Even if I don't know their industry, I'm like, where are you at? Do you feel like you're with your male peers? And say, the worst you can say in a salary negotiation, the worst I can say is no. So really opening up those conversations.
Yeah, I definitely have seen that as well, where we're more open and comfortable talking about it comes to saving and just retirement planning, just talking about investments. And I feel like that's become more in the forefront rather than people who haven't really thought about that in the past. It's just something that happened when you were old and we didn't have to worry about it now. But we do.
And there's a lot to be made for starting to invest very early, right? If you invest in your 20s, that compound interest, you're going to be so much better off. So I think that there's just, there's advantages certainly to financial institutions and fintechs to get people in, and to make them profitable customers. But there's also a real advantage for those customers to be savvy investors, to learn and evolve, so that, by the time you're 55, you're very well on your way to retirement. Or for some people, they retire early because of their investments. That said, I have no investment advice for anyone. US Bank would want me probably to say that, but I also have no personal investment advice. So don't take anything I've said, invest in whatever you think you should invest in, or go out to Financial IQ and learn more about personal finance just in general. They also do not have, investment advice. That's not sort of the place that we feel we should operate in. That is also risk recommendations. We would never say invest in these 2 stocks, anything like that.
Well, speaking of advice, what would you give as advice to other women in marketing who are looking to succeed? Not financial, but career-wise. Going back to when you were like 15 years ago, when you were just starting out, what advice would you give to a younger self and that other women can use to get ahead?
Yeah, I think there's sort of 2 big pieces of advice. One is just, be your authentic self, right? If you are whatever that is. I'm an introvert, right? If you're an introvert, if you're an extrovert, if you get your energy from really creative projects, if you love spreadsheets, right? Like, bring your authentic self to work and really lean into your strengths. And it's okay to share with your manager, share with your team what your strengths are, right? I manage to people's strengths. If something is your weakness, I don't think that it's necessary that you become the best on the team. So I think, know what your strengths are, know who you are. But I also just think that right now, I think that there's a lot of compassion fatigue. There's just a lot of burnout, and people have just been pressed from all sides, right? They're pressed from their job. They're pressed from childcare and child raising. They might be pressed from caregiving for older family members or parents. And so I always try to really assume positive intent. So if I try to lead with radical empathy, but also really assume positive intent. So if I have an interaction and somebody seems a little bit off, or, oh, I don't know why you said that to me that way on Teams, I always sort of just assume that everybody's operating from positive intent. Everybody is always trying to do their best. And so trying to be sort of more patient, more kind, more compassionate. And I find that gets better results, right? When people feel that they can be vulnerable around you, when people feel that they can share what they're struggling with, especially what they're struggling with professionally, I find that, you can build rapport and just sort of drive better results. I'm seeing a lot of sort of, moments where people are just really frustrated. And I think a lot of that doesn't have to do with work. It just has to do with kind of the time we're living in. It's challenging. It's hard. The news cycle, it can feel very dark or dire. And so that's really my advice. It's just sort of always assume positive intent. Always assume that people are really trying to be good and to work for the good of the company.
I love that. I definitely agree. I think positivity and empathy is so important these days. And I always have this saying that my grandmother would actually say, it's like, you get more bees with honey than with a stick. So, I always remind that to myself.
True, though.
It is.
No, I love that.
And it's like,
I think,
go ahead.
No, you go ahead. No, we're saying the same thing.
I was just going to say, we spend so much time at work working with our people, more so than at home, that it's so important to have that positive environment.
Yep. No, absolutely. And also it's okay to say if you are struggling too, right? So, I find that struggles are a part of life. And I think that it's okay to raise your hand and ask for help. It's okay to let your manager, let your team know, let your mentor know, hey, do you have any strategies? I'm going through something right now. This has been really hard. And I'll even reach out to agency people that just say, hey, I just know I've noticed like a slight difference in you. You just seem different. Like, is everything okay? And sometimes they're like, you know what, things aren't okay. I'm really overwhelmed, or, this I'm struggling with. And I find that, it's okay just to not be okay. And I think that was really probably something that I 15, 20 years ago did not feel that it was okay to be that way. I'm just going to tamp all this down. I'm not going to share anything that I'm struggling with. It's almost like a fake it till you make it. And I'm saying be kind, be positive, but I'm not saying fake it till you make it. I'm saying that will not get you anywhere. And I think especially as women, at times we were encouraged to wear a mask, not show our emotions, not show what we're struggling with. And so I say, take that mask off, be authentic. I've done it. And I actually find that people react more authentically to you and more positively when you really are your true authentic self.
100%. Well, I know we're coming close to the end of our session. So if our viewers have any questions, please use the Q&A to put your questions in. While we're waiting for those questions to come in, Katie, one last question I have for you. What are your fintech industry projections in marketing for the rest of 2022 and 2023?
Yeah, one of the things that I'm really interested in is just the copycatting of TikTok. So, it just seems like every social media platform is trying to beat TikTok. TikTok had such amazing organic growth starting, really from early 2020 when everybody was at home. But now it's sort of a center of people find a lot of joy on it. It's silly. It makes them laugh. They're very engaged there. So I'm very intrigued to see, how are the other platforms going to stand out? Are they going to stand out? Are we going to see LinkedIn be more like TikTok? I mean, that just seems ludicrous, but I'm just really intrigued by kind of where is social media going, and then obviously adding to that the metaverse. A lot of brands have been early adopters. US Bank will never be an early adopter for new technology because we want to wait, see how it works, ensure that it's safe from a cybersecurity perspective and data perspective. But I'm really intrigued to see kind of what brands are going to do next out there because there's been some really incredible things.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Katie. I really appreciate your time. Thank you to our viewers. It was a great time speaking with you, Katie.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Katie. Thank you, Marina. Take care. All right. Really enjoyed that session. And let's look forward to the next one. Welcoming our group of speakers, Natalie Miles, and moderated by Courtney Ray, the Senior Director of Sales at Influential.
Hi, great. I'm glad that tech-wise, that everything's working on my side. But hi, Natalie, great to talk to you today. So glad.
Hi, Courtney. Good morning. Yeah,
Good morning.
Likewise. No technology snafus so far.
Perfect. So I know kind of similarly to what was kind of being talked to at the end of the last panel, I think a lot of people want to know kind of how people get into the financial space. How do they get in potentially into fintech? How did you actually get into this vertical specifically?
Yeah, my journey I think was maybe a little more unique. Admittedly, I just sort of fell into it. So caveat being I've been in the fintech space for about 11 or 12 years. So quite a while since I think before fintech may have even been a term. Had a very formative experience very early on. I graduated in the midst of the last financial crisis and just so happened to one of my first jobs being as a financial counselor and a credit counselor. And that ended up being the most amazing user experience you can possibly imagine. So having lots of one-on-one conversations with people in very dire financial straits. And it really made me realize how poorly served most Americans are and were at the time by, most legacy financial institutions and systems at the time. So this was at the time where fintech, I guess, 1.0 started to emerge. So some of the early players, one of those being Lending Club, started sort of got my attention. It just so happened that Lending Club had an office right next door to the credit counseling agency I was at. So ended up at Lending Club as my first fintech job, and then that just sort of set the trajectory. But it was really that experience early on, really just talking with people one-on-one that made me realize this was a huge opportunity and huge area of friction. And that fintech was just a massive opportunity to upend these systems that had managed to remain largely untouched despite, technology moving, all these other industries years ahead.
Yeah, it's actually crazy. I think we all kind of realized the importance of fintech once the pandemic hit and people weren't going out and doing traditional banking and kind of not only turn to kind of being able to access your money quickly, but kind of that experience has really grown, I think, over the last 2 years. It's crazy. I think we're still kind of in it, but 2 years ago.
It's been impressive seeing the massive acceleration over the last 2 years of fintech just take off. Yeah, I think to your point, we're very much realizing how much it's needed, especially with certain segments and demographics who are just very much underserved by traditional banks.
Mm-hmm. And switching a little bit to the topic at hand, I know in kind of our conversations that we've had, we've obviously been talking about kind of this female role within the finance space, but how have you kind of seen, obviously you've been working in the fintech space for a while, have you kind of seen that evolution in female roles within that space?
Yeah, I don't think it's a surprise that fintech in general, women tend to be underrepresented. If you think about financial services, women are underrepresented. If you think about technology, women are underrepresented. Of course, in fintech, women tend to be underrepresented. I think we've made a lot of progress from what I've seen over the last few years. When I started, it was very much a boys' club. A lot of the typical finance bros you would expect. I think we've made a lot of headway. Some of that, I think, is just the pipelines, especially at the college level and STEM roles, really opening up to women. I think what's really interesting as well is this recognition, especially for fintech products that are trying to design for, people who are trying to design financial inclusion products. I think it's very hard and to hire people who look like the product you're trying to build for. That's a issue I see all the time. When you're trying to build a product for people who are living paycheck to paycheck or tend to be lower in terms of income. I think especially in Silicon Valley, we typically don't look like those people. I think especially we've come to realize how much representation matters in terms of building products that look like our consumers. So I think especially when it comes to female representation too, we're starting to understand that women have very different financial needs. And actually, especially if you're building products towards financial inclusion, those will just disproportionately impact women. So over time, I think it's also the case too that women tend to be attracted towards these more mission-driven companies that are working on tough problems of financial inclusion. So I think just naturally the talent pool is starting to skew more and more female.
Mm-hmm. And you kind of talked, I think, about how product tends to be, I think, a little bit more male-driven, but you said you've seen kind of on what you've worked on that the marketing side has kind of lent itself, though, to more female roles and kind of that progression on that side.
Yeah, I'm very fortunate to work at a company, Chime, where we do have really strong female leadership at the product level as well as at the marketing level. I've certainly seen at past orgs and as well as talking to female colleagues who are also in the space. Marketing does tend to be more of a female-led org often. Product women tend to be underrepresented, especially in leadership positions. That can be problematic for all the reasons we just talked about in terms of product designing features and products for people who may not look like them, especially when it comes to women. I think we've certainly made a lot of headway on that front, especially in terms of women leadership in product leadership positions. But certainly in past roles where we've had that gender imbalance across orgs, that can sometimes impact how marketing and product works together. I think one, it can be difficult as a woman to establish credibility, especially in a predominantly male org. And so what I often found was in order to establish that credibility, I had to, one, rely on male allies, which unfortunately is important, but also really relying on external resources from established people with a lot of growth credibility. So whether it was a framework from Andrew Chen or somewhere else, right? So working with some of my male colleagues at past places, you run into that issue of like, oh, you have this great idea and you say it and it just falls on deaf ears. You either need a male colleague to amplify it or you have to explain, oh, well, this is actually from, you know, a growth engineer at Pinterest. So I think we've made some progress on that front. What I think is unique about that, though, in terms of marketing tending to skew more female and product tending to skew more male, there is an opportunity in that marketing has potentially like the ability to form the product roadmap more, because I think marketing often has a lot of insights about who our members are, especially if they tend to skew female, right? We can help make sure that the products and features that product is building is actually going to best serve our members. And especially when it comes to things like go-to-market strategy, making sure that the value props we're using are ones that will resonate with our female audience.
Mm-hmm. And kind of off those lines, I think we had kind of chatted about, do you ever feel that Chime is on the marketing side really directing specific messaging towards female audiences? I know it's very interesting to see that I think sometimes we forget that the product, even though, you know, it has the same utility, is really being used very differently between a male and female audience. Do you think the messaging kind of aligns with some of those use cases?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. So for some context, Chime's the largest neobank in the United States. Traditionally, we serve people who have been underbanked and who tend to be lower income. So you can imagine that also tends to be women, since women tend to earn less on average. We haven't set forth an explicit segmentation strategy, but it certainly informs a lot of our messaging in very implicit ways, which is why I think female representation in marketing and product roles is so important, because you have to understand how some of those, what you don't want is, you know, to have some sort of unconscious bias. And obviously you want to make sure your value props are actually resonating with your members and your users. So having that representation, understand who your users are, and if they are women, right? I think it's important that you have representation at the marketing and product level to make sure that your messaging strategy is actually aligning with your users. So in terms of segmentation strategy, we haven't, you know, necessarily explicitly segmented by gender, but certainly in terms of our product offerings. So whether it's our fee-free overdraft, which is designed to get people to their next paycheck, we find that women use that far more than men, because women are more likely to overdraft given their unique financial needs. I think we're also very careful not to introduce a lot of unconscious bias in those value props. So what we have seen is some competitors who also have a fee-free overdraft with a sort of tipping business model. What we've seen from some of those competitors is that they will play up certain value props around altruism and I would say guilt tripping. And they use predominantly female stock images. And that's probably because they've figured out that women tend to tip more and tip higher amounts on average. And so you have this interesting dichotomy where, you know, these fee-free overdraft products can be beneficial, especially if you think about how disproportionately women are impacted by overdrafts. And you get these sort of snowball overdraft situations where women keep overdrafting on small dollar amounts given their unique transaction tendencies versus men. But then, right, you introduce a business model that actually exploits some of those unique needs that predominantly impact women. So that's something we're very conscious of, and we very much avoid in our marketing.
Mm-hmm. Along those lines, do you think there's specific initiatives that you guys run that have been extremely effective? Obviously, it seems like you're avoiding kind of that direct targeting message, but is there anything that you think is kind of holistically worked well that kind of also benefits female audiences, whether that be just specific messaging or more just product tailored initiatives?
Yeah, I mean, what's exciting right now, we're starting to delve more and more into the world of personalization. Obviously, we have to be very careful with that. There's often lots of paradoxes with personalization in terms of balancing privacy, and then kind of very similar, making sure that we're not introducing a lot of unconscious bias, even if we can do one-to-one type personalization. Certainly, though, that level of personalization will hopefully mean we can do more benefits-focused marketing. So if you think about something like our credit builder product, right? The initial use case of I want to improve my credit score, we can certainly do some level of segmentation around that, but then getting the next level deeper of why do you want to improve your credit score? And certainly why women may want to improve their credit score, why men want to improve their credit score. There's probably a lot of overlap, but there may be some unique needs that we can certainly play up the benefits of for our female members. So that's something we're starting to explore. But I would say we're not necessarily explicitly, pursuing more of like a gender segmentation strategy. It's really just understanding what our member needs are at a one-to-one level. It just so happens that, what we will probably find is, there will be certain personas with different needs, and women may fall into certain personas disproportionately.
Mm-hmm. It's really interesting on our side in the influencer space, and we've been doing a lot of reporting, I think, because of the growth of just the industry on social. I know in the last conversation, they were kind of talking about TikTok and how a lot of financial brands are starting to test out TikTok now that, it's been around in the space for a while. But we've actually seen that there's been a huge number of female financial influencers that are offering tips, especially around specific female focused issues, whether that be, saving because they're the ones that are kind of managing finances for a family. But also we've seen this huge growth with diverse female influencers within the financial space and kind of adding a very different lens on, I think, some of the issues that come up. So it's very interesting, like you're saying, that there are so many issues within the financial space that it's become very broad and kind of the ability to target all of those different interests and segments.
Yeah, and I think you see that too in a little bit of the fragmentation, especially of the neobank space, right? Chime is one of the early front runners, but what you've seen in recent years is all these very niche neobanks, whether it's Greenwood or Ellevest. A lot of these financial institutions are springing up because there are many different ways or many different personas out there with very unique financial needs. I think the challenge is designing a product that has wide enough appeal and that can appeal to all these different segments and all their unique individual needs.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. I think also coming off the lines of the last conversation, I think a lot of individuals that are kind of reaching the point where they're millennial or slightly older, or even we're seeing this a little bit with Gen Z, are trying to figure out, how to get into finance. What are they going to do financially? We're on the brink of a recession. From just a career standpoint, what advice would you give to women looking to get into the finance or the fintech space?
Yeah, there's so many great resources out there now. One, I think it's good to, start with an understanding of money movement, credit processing, credit score processing, and debit processing, and how all those different systems work in a very holistic way. There's so many opportunities, and I think industry events out there. I'd also just say, it's always great to, one thing I've seen, we also hire a lot of marketers who don't necessarily have fintech experience per se. A lot of them have come from other tech companies. So I think it's still a fairly easy jump to make from other ancillary areas of tech into fintech. I actually personally think it's harder to hire for marketing expertise than it is for fintech expertise. I think the fintech expertise is a little bit easier to develop. That said, I think there is a huge area of opportunity to for marketers with specific financial services expertise, kind of going into understanding how those different systems work certainly helps when it comes to your go-to-market strategies, and then also just having a deep user understanding of what the different segments and personas and what their unique financial needs are. Especially, right, if you don't come from a similar background to the audience or the users that you're trying to target.
And then one more question, I think, before we get into Q&A. So I always like to ask this, I think, because sometimes we get so focused into the day-to-day of marketing that we kind of forget some of the bigger picture. So what's one thing that you're looking forward to in kind of the back half of the year personally, and one thing that you're looking forward to professionally?
Yeah. So professionally, it's a very interesting time to be in fintech. We're certainly going through a bloodbath. I actually think I tend to view chaos as an opportunity. I think there's been a bit of a gold rush in the fintech industry. And I think when that happens, you often see people moving into the space for maybe the wrong reasons. I think what's happening now, will I hopefully be healthy for the industry in the long term. I think what's especially exciting for those who are working on products in the financial inclusion space, this is a time where your product is going to be more needed now than ever. There's never a time where your users or audience are going to need to use your product. So if anything, if you're there for the right reasons, for the mission, right, this is going to be a very fulfilling time, I think, for a lot of people in the space. It's hard coming off of the last 2 years of COVID. We're starting to finally do some travel. That said, I have a 3-year-old, and traveling with a 3-year-old, I don't know. I'm looking forward to returning back to normal, whatever that looks like. Not that there is a real return to the baseline pre-COVID. But I think just what I'm really looking forward to is human connection again. I think a lot of us are craving that after the last 2 years. So looking forward to finally catching up with friends and families and going to some many overdue weddings.
It's funny, I have a new 5-month-old nephew, and it's the first child in the family, and everyone's like, oh, you're gonna travel? My brother's like, no, not for a while. Don't know if we can do that much travel with a child, but yeah, I think travel, in most of the conversations I've had, travel seems to be the top kind of, everyone's ready to get back into regular travel and kind of have some sense of normalcy, I think, just from being remote for so long.
Yeah.
I don't know if anybody has any questions that they'd like to submit, but I think while we wait for questions to come in, one thing that you kind of started to touch on that's going to be very interesting in kind of this recession, leading up to recession and the amount of inflation that we're seeing right now, especially for those of us who are lucky enough to live in California and gas is like $7 a gallon. Have you guys kind of seen certain planning, whether that be from the product side or the marketing side, kind of what are you guys envisioning it's going to look like in the back half of the year and into next year? Any type of trends or things that you guys are starting to prepare for?
Yeah, I mean, what's interesting, if you think about the core products that Chime offers, really these just lend themselves very well to a high inflationary environment and in a recession environment. So, I mean, more than ever, people are going to be living paycheck to paycheck. It's going to, people are more likely to overdraft when they fill up at the gas station. I think I just read something that many gas stations are now doing $70 authorization holds. Lots of people aren't going to be able to afford that and aren't going to be hit with overdraft fees. So if anything, we're starting to realize the value props of Chime are going to be more important now than ever before. So even though we're sort of riding off of these COVID tailwinds, and there was a lot of tailwinds in the neobank space in terms of mobile first banking, Not all of those, I would say, neobanks necessarily have a product that are tailored to what are sort of some of the new emerging financial needs that a lot of consumers are going to be facing. So especially paycheck liquidity, credit scores will be negatively impacted. So the ability to repair credit, those are going to be very important now more than ever.
Mm-hmm. And then from just a marketing side, obviously fintech and neobanks, this use case is kind of, it tends to lend itself towards a slightly younger audience. Do you guys feel like you're still targeting from a market perspective on social, because that's where a lot of younger audiences live? Do you guys kind of do a broad media mix? How do you guys kind of structure that to target the audiences that would most likely be using the app?
Yeah, so we do have a very broad marketing mix. Social is something we're exploring more and more. Certainly TikTok is a channel we're starting to test into more frequently. We're really invested in building a community, especially on our social channels. So we think organic growth will be important. I think a lot of companies too will, I would imagine, would start looking more and more towards organic growth as a lever. As you know, there's pressure to deliver lower CAC. So that's something we're continuing to double down on.
Mm-hmm. And I know at the beginning you kind of mentioned you've seen a lot of competitors that may be leaning towards marketing strategies that overtly target women, whether that be just those that are being used in you know, the imaging that's being used, or whether that's doing social good. Have there been any specific learnings that you guys have really taken in-house to kind of make sure that you're still targeting a broader audience? You're not, you know, distinctly targeting, you know, males versus females or specific segments over others?
I think one example. So we were rolling out our expanded ATM network, and a lot of our initial value props were around convenience. I think some initial testing we did sort of yielded some interesting findings around, you know, not just convenience, but also safety and cleanliness, but especially the safety part, which, you know, predominantly is something women care more about. So you're going to an ATM, you're withdrawing money, you want to make sure your ATM's in a safe location and not some sketchy alley somewhere. And so I think that was an interesting learning in terms of making sure that we're doing the underlying user research to find what those value props are. I think it's very easy to come up with a new feature or new product. But in terms of being able to do that benefits focused marketing, if you don't have that underlying research, it's hard to actually tailor those value props to deliver an effective go-to-market moment.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think people that don't work in the financial space don't realize how much research is really needed, because it's obviously banking, everyone banks or invests or manages finance, and everyone does it for a very specific reason within certain segments. So I think it's very interesting, the level of research that's really needed to understand specific audiences. And even kind of see that honestly was not something that I even thought of when you were talking about, you know, where ATMs are located and where you're putting ATMs, because and it's funny because I specifically haven't gone to ATMs at nighttime or things like that. So it's subconscious things that I'm thinking, but it's interesting to hear that that's being kind of rolled into marketing and product.
Yeah, and that's why I think it's so important. One, the user research aspect, but two, that representation piece, because going back to, I think there are a lot of people designing financial products for people who don't look like them. And that is just inherently difficult to do if you don't have that deep understanding of your user and representation of people who look like your customers.
Mm-hmm. And then what is one thing that you have really enjoyed in working in the finance fintech space?
Yeah, so I think in tech, we tend to often veer towards, you know, mission driven and we all think we're changing the world. I think what's really special, especially in certain areas of the fintech space, we truly are creating something that can demonstrably improve people's lives. I think that is actually rare to find at a lot of companies where what you do has a positive impact. And you can even see that in the underlying business model, right? We only do well when our members do well. Versus a lot of, I think companies actually end up being zero sum when you think about it, where they only do well at the expense of their customers. So really working in a positive sum business. You know, I've often joked at other places of work, it's not life or death. I think really when you think about when it comes to people's money, it is very much their livelihood. It impacts their ability to pay the bills, be able to like not having a card decline when, you know, they're paying for dinner with their kids. So it is very gratifying working in this space. I think it is, and what I think is also special about that too, all those difficult growing pains that I think a lot of high growth companies go through, so much of that is easier when everyone is there for the right reasons and there for the mission, right? You can always tie back to what should we do? Well, we need to do what's right for our members. And I think it just creates a much more interesting camaraderie and working dynamic with colleagues.
I think, have you guys kind of seen the growth in the fintech space and people turning towards using it as opposed to, I think, for slightly older people that have been banking with traditional banks for a long time, I think there's a little bit of a stigma and a distrust in getting onto an app and banking versus, you know, being able to drive to a physical bank and go in and see a teller. Have you guys kind of seen that growth during the pandemic, or do you think it's still going to continue to grow over the next couple of years?
I think the trust issue is still a huge area of opportunity. It is very much table stakes in terms of acquiring lots of users, especially older users. That said, I think what's been interesting that we've sort of toyed with, and I've seen other companies do this as well, is sort of this mobile banking and branchlessness as a feature, not a bug, especially during COVID. I think it's especially true for millennials and Gen Z, sort of that branchless virtual bank has a lot of benefits, right? During the pandemic, at one point, I had to open up a joint account with my husband at a traditional bank, and I couldn't do it remotely, which was the most high friction, frustrating process where we had to actually go into a physical bank, and there actually wasn't a banker there, which I guess you need like in a special position to actually open up a joint account. So then we had to come back at another time, and it wasn't readily apparent when, you know, there would be an open window because there was no scheduling system in place. And that was all just to open up account where I just wanted to give them my money, just take my money. And it was just so hard. So there's still, I would say there's still a long way to go on the traditional bank side, where it's still very high friction process, even to do the most basic of actions. And I think as long as that continues to persist, there's a huge advantage to, you know, going with a neobank.
Mm-hmm. And do you think that the audience then is still skewing for Chime very much on the younger side? And do you think that it's more female to male, or do you think it's still kind of an even split?
Yeah, I mean, we do skew more female. And I think that is partly due to, you know, kind of what we alluded to earlier, right? Women do tend to be more likely to earn less and are more likely to live paycheck to paycheck. And that means a lot of traditional banks aren't good products for them. And then a product like Chime is. So we do tend to skew more female. We do tend to skew younger. We are starting to see some inroads, especially I think with older Americans. I I think partly some of that is overcoming that like initial trust and what is a neobank or a virtual bank. I think as it becomes more just commonplace, we'll see some of those barriers to entry decrease, and I think we'll see wider adoption.
And this is going back to a point you made earlier. I know that you said the growth within the fintech space has been astronomical over the last, I'd say 2 to 3 years. I think what I've seen is not only just, neobanks, but then also there's a lot of financial products around teaching kids how to manage money. And there's just been so many apps that popped up. How do you guys make sure that you're maintaining share of voice, that you're not getting lost in the shuffle amongst kind of all of the competitors that are starting to pop up?
Yeah, that is an interesting challenge. I think one, trust and credibility, as we talked about, adopting sort of a virtual bank requires sort of a leap of faith. I think that is one area where being sort of a front runner, right? We have established credibility. We've been in this space for many years, right? We're FDIC insured. All the protections you enjoy with a physical bank, you enjoy with Chime. So I think that trust and credibility goes a long way. We have great brand cash, I would say. And I think, I think more and more, the banking space is going to be heavily commoditized. Banking as a service has really made it very easy to, spin up a financial service product or a neobank product. I think one, remaining to being innovative in terms of what products and features we continue to build and making sure we're building the right ones, especially for our audience and our members, is going to be important, and we continue to do that. And then I think that brand piece is going to be important as well. So in a very heavily commoditized space, how do you differentiate between very identical products? It's going to be the one with the higher brand recognition and the one that you can trust, that has been around and has established credibility.
Mm-hmm. So we've done a lot of work on the influencer side within the financial space, and I think it's been a great way to kind of lend certain voices to kind of financial products and financial services, because I think sometimes audiences don't necessarily view financial products as a sexy product to get served ads for.
Yeah.
And I know that obviously a lot of times, traditional banks will associate themselves with sports initiatives or things like that. Are there certain kind of larger scale initiatives or things that you guys are aligning yourself with, not only to build the trust, but maybe to kind of grab the attention of specific audiences?
Yeah, I mean, we're certainly veering more in the influencer world and partnership world. We've got a partnership with the Dallas Mavericks. And I think this is something a lot of neobanks are starting to follow as well. So we've seen other neobanks start to pursue also partnerships in the sporting realm. I'd say, it's kind of an interesting question. I think for a long time, marketing and financial services hasn't always been perceived as glamorous or sexy. Financial services is just not sexy. I think some of that's changing, right? You see more and more interesting marketing coming out of a lot of these financial service companies. I mean, one, if you watched the Super Bowl, so many of those ads were a lot of crypto companies, some financial services, and they were doing really unique marketing. I think Klarna has a really great marketing program as well. They've done really interesting things, especially on Instagram, right? Like, you wouldn't think of Klarna as a very visual product. And would you have channel fit with something like Instagram that is very visual, but sort of the whole dipping a pink thing, right? That was a very unique way to, I think, build a lot of brand recognition. So I think the possibilities there. And I think whoever does it well, going back to how do you differentiate yourself in a heavily commoditized industry, having a very strong brand and identity is going to be a big piece of that.
I definitely agree. I think outside, you're right, on the Instagram side, we've obviously seen financial be important there, but then on the TikTok side, we've started to see that growth in people doing TikTok and some of those hashtag challenges where you're getting larger scale recognition. A lot of the content's very fun and entertaining, which I think sometimes is traditionally very different for what we've seen, in old school financial institutions, especially as we love all of the great legal restrictions and things and working through that. But have you guys explored TikTok? Are you guys thinking about doing TikTok?
Yeah, and we've seen some success so far. I think we ran a sweepstakes. Sweepstakes has been a really great growth lever. So also thinking about creative ways to activate your community and then do sort of fun, interesting things that even sort of in the unsexy financial services sphere, right? Especially the sweepstakes mechanism. It's you can use it in a way that can be a very fun and enticing sort of like call to action for existing members and prospects. So yeah, sweepstakes is an interesting one. We're also very mindful too, right? Part of what we want to do is financial education and financial literacy. How can we do those things in sort of interesting and fun ways? So one, right, we're continuing to fulfill our mission to help people achieve financial peace of mind and progress, but also be able to brand ourselves in a very sort of fun and exciting way, but also deliver value and make sure that we're still presenting ourselves as an established financial institution.
Yeah, I think that financial education has become such a big topic that we've seen on social, regardless of platform, that I think a huge millennial audience is all hitting that age where you're buying homes and investing and having kids. And it's a really important topic, especially for Gen Z as well, as they kind of age up, to make sure that they understand, how to manage their money and what, is the best option for them.
Yeah.
I think we're at time, I believe, but it was great to chat. Excited to see what Chime is going to have coming in the back half of the year. And hopefully, the fintech space continues to grow and really welcome women into all aspects of the business.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Courtney. It was great being here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Natalie and Courtney. Really enjoyed your thoughts. Well, that's the end of the day. Thank you, everyone, for joining us and tuning in. Big shout out to our speakers, our sponsors, and our audience. Be sure to check out the Brand Innovators website to learn more about our next event and many